I think ultimately acquisition is a long game, and advisors told us that early on. They were like, plant a bunch of seeds and you'll be shocked how many people call you a year from now because circumstances have changed. It's understanding sort of what are their priorities, can you meet those priorities, and if so, sort of how do you build the trust around that as you move forward?
There's an entire generation of Americans who no longer care about prestige, titles, work travel, fancy offices, and lunches. Welcome to Mundane Millionaires, a podcast for this generation of small business owners who want to set their ego aside and focus on what matters: family, community, quality of life, and cash flows. In each episode, Eric Pacifici and Kevin Henderson uncover what it takes to get a little money in the bank, control your time, and invest in building great families and lives. Let's get started.
Kevin, welcome back to Mundane Millionaires. Good to see you.
You've got the best cold open voice, Eric. Have I ever told you that? Just the energy and enthusiasm to be back on one more episode. It's dripping from your voice.
Well, I know I am. I'm fired up, man, because I love small business. I love business buying. I'm obsessed with this. You know this. I talk about this 22 hours a day. I drive everybody in my life crazy talking about business buying, and it's literally all I do. And in my free time, I take calls from prospective buyers and searchers, and I'm obsessed with it. So
I love it.
In line with that obsession, we have today Taylor Wallace, somebody who did the holy grail of ETA, in my opinion. And he did it, in his own words, as a kind of a happy accident or an accidental searcher. And I'll give you the quick rundown on Taylor for the audience's benefit. He is a tech guy at heart, started his career in tech, lived all over the world, did a number of things in business, ended up with addiction that he talks about openly, was able to overcome that addiction very triumphantly. And as a result of that, he got to know his now partner, Mike, through their sobriety and through a kind of sequence of events that he touches on a little bit at the beginning of the podcast. He ended up in Florida around the time of COVID. They started searching for a business to buy, bought in the doggy daycare space, or the dog hospitality space, pet hospitality space. And then over the course of 3 years, this was in end of 2020, over the course of 3 years, was able to acquire a number of complementary businesses, start a few complementary businesses, and then ultimately exit the whole thing to a strategic partner that they're now working with to grow an even bigger brand. So, all things considered, as successful of a ETA and entrepreneurship through acquisition story as I think I've ever heard. And he's the perfect guy for it too, because he's salt of the earth. He's a great guy. He's very smart. He's very interesting. He's not a day-to-day, inside the facility operator. That's where his partner comes in. So he talks a lot about kind of the importance of that partnership to the success of the venture. But I was blown away by Taylor, as I always am every time I talk with him. What was your takeaway here, Kev?
Yeah, super impressive guy. I think the thing that continues to sit with me after we wrapped up this conversation is this idea not of exiting the business, but of partnering on my business, right? And a lot of times I think we think of chasing that holy grail of like exiting to private equity. They could pay private equity multiples, and I can have a great return on what I've built. But the way he thinks about it and the way he looks at that transaction as a continuing partnership, he's still very much involved in the business. The fund and platform is very much relying on Taylor and his partner to continue to drive growth. It's kind of changing real time the way I look at exiting, right? And thinking about exiting, that I think is a great framework for a lot of searchers to keep in mind, that the quote unquote exit isn't necessarily a true exit. It is for some, but it doesn't have to be. It can be the next phase of growth in a business that you're continuing to build and continuing to love, in the way that you could tell Taylor and his partner really love the pet hospitality space.
Yeah. And we hear this concept from time to time, like, the 0 to 1 entrepreneur gets to a place in the business where they say, I've gone as far as I can go. I've taken this as far as I can go. And to your point, finding that exit that isn't, and I'm selling you the whole thing and I'm sailing away, but I'm actually now partnering with somebody who can get us to the next level through resources and expertise, I think is a really smart thing. But it takes the ability that some of us have and some of us do not to, and he addresses it at the beginning to say, I'm not the guy. I'm not the
Well,
person who's going to take this.
and the great thing about his story that we'll get into only for a brief moment in the episode is that his story includes both sides of that, because his partnering with the platform was his own realization of, like, we've taken it as far as we can. It's time to partner with someone to go to that next level. But their very first acquisition, Taylor and his partner, their very first acquisition was the product of the same thing. It was a husband and wife team, very part-time for the husband. He had his own projects going on, and they realized that they had stumbled on something great, that this could become a real business. And he just didn't have the bandwidth and ability to run it and grow it to do it justice. And that's how Taylor and his partner even got Paws and Rex and Paws and Rec in the first case. So it's a theme we hear coming up over and over again, not just in his story, but in entrepreneurship through acquisition in general.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Taylor has a pretty cool story. He's a pretty cool guy. And so let's punt to Taylor Wallace of Paws and Rex. Taylor, welcome to the pod, man. We excited to have you on. You described yourself as kind of an accidental searcher. So you in 2020 bought a business called Paws and Rex that you recently exited from. Tell us about the search process and how you kind of accidentally fell into entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Sure. Yeah. So it's really good to be here, guys. I was a tech guy. I started my first software company about a year out of college and did the tech thing for over a decade, ran that software company for about 5 years, and then was kind of a gunslinging tech consultant for whoever wanted to pay me the most money to talk about their crazy tech ideas for about 5 years. Jumped around the world, lived in Europe and California and Miami, and got to work on some really interesting technologies, everything from crypto to machine brain interfaces and augmented reality, and really enjoyed that work. And while I was running my first startup, my roommate and I were both getting sober from drugs and alcohol abuse, and we became friends. He took a job at a doggy daycare scooping poop, and was just kind of trying to rebuild his life. And we became roommates, and he's running this doggy daycare. He quickly gets promoted to the general manager, and I'm running the software startup, and we're trying to figure out how to live as better men and run these businesses. And we're coming home every night swapping notes. And it quickly became apparent that he was doing a ton of work and his owner was making all the money. So we kind of developed this dream together that, like, hey, someday, like, let's do a doggy daycare together. You know how to run it. I know how to build a company. So let's do that. But I ended up leaving Tampa and kind of going off on my tech adventures for a couple of years. And I landed in Miami in February of 2020 and was really burnt out on travel and kind of jumping jobs, and decided I'm going to sign a lease, buy a bed, and kind of stay in Miami for a bit. And then COVID happened and I got laid off in a month into lockdown, and I'm living in this like beautiful apartment in Miami with no friends and no high paying tech job.
Not the worst place to be stranded, though, if we're being honest. I mean, of all the places, it could have been Cleveland, Ohio. So at least you had that going.
It's true. What was weird, though, is Miami was really shut down during COVID. And I was coming back to Tampa, and Tampa was pretty open in those first few months. So I ended up breaking my lease and coming back here to just kind of regroup. And my buddy and I started talking again, and we're like, hey, maybe he was really burnt out. I was burnt out on what I was doing. It was like, maybe now's the time to kind of explore this. So we decided we're going to do a doggy daycare, and he was in a franchise system. So that was where we naturally started, was thinking about buying out his owner or doing a new unit in his system. And we looked at some of the other franchises, and we sort of landed on, like, he had the ops experience, I had the business experience. We didn't really need the franchisor. So we were going to roll our own, and we stumbled upon an independent for sale and decided to buy that. And that was the beginning of our journey together. And yeah, had no idea what search was, had no idea I didn't even know you could buy a small business. It was just like, I guess you can do that. And we did it.
Yeah, I was going to say, so bridge that gap. If you didn't even think buying a business was a thing, how did you stumble across this first one to buy?
We kind of snaked it from one of the franchises. They were trying to convince us to sign a franchise agreement because they had an independent that they were trying to buy and convert locally. And they basically were like, hey, if you sign a franchise agreement and you pay us 50 G's, we'll let you see this facility that you might want to buy. And we were like, well, we'll sign an agreement that we won't buy it if we see it, but I'm not going to become a franchisee to potentially buy this unit I haven't seen yet. So they were being very difficult. So we just figured, hey, there's only a few doggy daycares in Tampa. Let's just call them all and see which one's for sale. And that's what we did, and we ended up buying it.
I love that.
No, that's a great. So, what did the phone calls look like? Because obviously, you can't just call the front desk and say, "Hey, are you for sale?" without upsetting, you know,
I
possibly
think
upsetting a
that
variety of people.
I think that was just an email that was like, hey, here's who we are. We've been in the space and we're interested in potentially buying a doggy daycare. Would you ever consider selling? Knowing that they were likely the ones that the franchise was talking about. And they're like, oh, actually, yeah, all our financials are already prepared and we have a broker and we're ready to go. Like, oh, wow, amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm shocked.
We've reached out to a lot of other daycares, and yeah, it's always a fine balance of, how do you approach? And we mostly just try to get the owners on the phone if we can.
Yeah. Where was your roommate and friend and, now at this point in the story, partner, where was he? Was he in Tampa or was he somewhere else?
He was running the largest doggy daycare in Tampa at the time.
Okay. Gotcha. And Tampa's home for you, I assume. Is that why you're referring to back to Tampa?
Well, it's sort of home. Like, I grew up outside Philadelphia, and my family's kind of slowly migrated here. So I lived in Europe for a couple of years, and then I was in New York City right after college, but then moved here to build my first company, and it's become home.
So that was February. You were laid off roughly April 2020. Bridge that time gap. So how you had this idea, you started calling around, you were talking to franchisors. When was it that you actually closed?
We closed, I think it was October 1, 2020.
Got it. Okay. So pretty quick.
Wow. Yeah. Very quick.
Yeah. We probably talked to that business, I think late August 2020, and we closed by October.
Wow.
Right in the heart of the pandemic. And if I recall, that was actually, was it good for the dog business or was it?
It depended on where you were. Florida was interesting because we opened up very quickly here. So most of the facilities were kind of rebounding by that point. And I think the business we acquired had just kind of gotten back to pre-COVID revenue numbers. But every business we looked at for kind of the next year and a half, they had this big drop off, and most of them got back or exceeded their pre-COVID revenue numbers because everybody got puppies during COVID.
We got crazy.
And the dog industry as a whole went nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so the first deal was off market. Tell us about that. So you reach out to the seller, no broker involved. It's gutsy to do an off market deal generally, but to do it as your first acquisition, can be really tough without a broker there to bridge the gap. Or was there a broker?
He wasn't really a broker. He was kind of their long-standing CPA who had done deals before. So they had kind of all their financials and everything pulled together. But yeah, I mean, knowing what we know now, it definitely would have taken us more than a month to do diligence. We didn't do a lot of diligence. I was ticking and tying and sort of doing QOV, and like I'm a C player in a spreadsheet. So the joke I tell people is like our first financial model, I was terrified around it because I just didn't know any better, and I had never really done a financial model before. And in hindsight, it was a horrible model because we doubled our projections in 6 months.
So it was a horrible in all the right ways.
Yes. Yep.
Financial projections are a funny thing, right?
They are. And I get what you mean about how disconcerting that can be. Like, I'm sure it resonates with a lot of first-time searchers listening to this of like, even if you've done modeling, like for a private equity fund in a prior life or something, like it's just fundamentally different. I mean, it's fundamentally not different, but it's different in the margins and the stakes and, the personal emotion of like, I'm buying my first business gets caught up in it. And there's always that worry in the back of your head of like, what am I missing? This looks great on paper. What am I missing?
Yeah, I think some of the advice I got is like the model's a guide, right? And it should help you make your decision, but it's just another data point or set of data points.
Hey guys, I have to pause for somebody's knocking on my door. Hold on just a second. I'm so sorry.
So for the benefit of listeners and those watching, Eric had to interrupt the recording for a minute for a knock at the door. And what just arrived, Eric?
2 giant cases of New York style pizza from John of Bleecker Street. I don't yet know who it's from. I guess I'll do an unboxing video, but super exciting, man. It's a Friday too. I feel great. It's good to see you both.
I'm happy for you. I expect no Domino's photos tonight. None of that blasphemy.
Or maybe some Domino's photos.
Don't do it.
Don't want to break your heart, Taylor. There's a really good Detroit style place here in town that I'm trying to get over to, but we'll see if I have time to make it. I'm riding the Lions. When you guys listen to this, we'll know if the Lions won or lost. But
Oh, nice.
Well, if it's not apparent now, this episode is not sponsored by Domino's. So
Definitely not. Don't take their money.
with that,
if they want to give it to me, I won't say no, Taylor. So
Fair.
anyways,
everything's for
back to-
sale, Taylor. Everything's for sale.
Yeah.
let's keep talking about doggy daycare acquisitions because it's a really popular space, Taylor. And I don't know if it was in 2020, but I've gotten, an unbelievable amount of calls of people trying to acquire doggy daycares. I actually have another client here in town who bought one around the same time as you did and has his brother running it. It's going fantastic. It's really
We
good
actually
business.
looked at that deal and I kicked myself for not buying that one. We
funny.
came very close to pulling the trigger and we reached back out right before close. I didn't realize you guys did that deal because we sort of got our shit together and wanted to buy it again. And then it had already closed with that guy.
Yeah, he's an amazing entrepreneur here in town. We actually did not do his deal. We did a subsequent deal for him, a much larger
Nice.
transaction. He's a phenomenal guy. And there's a lot of really good entrepreneurs and business buyers in Florida. I'm sure many places, but
So for someone interested in the space, Taylor, like how do you analyze market demand? Because I think about I actually don't hear much about doggy daycare out where I'm at in Texas. But when we've tried to, when we've been traveling or something and tried to get a spot for our dog, I mean, we've driven, 45 minutes to a place that has availability, within a few weeks of planning a trip. Like it feels like in a place like DFW, it's nowhere near saturated, but maybe that's just because we look when we're traveling around holidays or something. If someone's out there and they're hearing this and they're like, yeah, doggy daycare, that's awesome. How do they start going about thinking and analyzing, like, what's the demand like in my area to try and get into this line of business and grow and actually have the demand to meet?
Yeah, I think generally across the industry, there's a feeling, and I think it's accurate that there's way more demand than there is capacity in pretty much every major market. It's a relatively new business, right? Doggy daycare really wasn't a thing 15, 20 years ago, and they're not like pizza shops where you can just kind of pop them up in a couple months. Like to build a serious pet resort is a 2-year project, and it's pretty capital intensive. And I think you're also seeing on the consolidation side of the house that any pet resort that's kind of north of $1 million in EBITDA is going to trade for a pretty premium multiple, and it's probably not going to be attainable for a searcher. And those pet resort owners know that, and they're talking to consolidators like the one we're a part of now. So if you're a search entrepreneur and you're really interested in the pet space, your only real option is probably going to be a smaller facility, kind of like the one we bought that is a couple $100K in EBITDA and trying to kind of grow something from there. But to answer your question directly, I mean, the calculus we generally do is you can assume 50% of Americans have dogs. That's about the stat. There's more dogs in the United States now than there are children under the age of 18. So then it becomes about sort of what's the demographics of the dog owner in your city. And for us, we look for density. So we want people that ideally live in apartments rather than houses with big yards, because that dog is probably going to need daycare more than a dog that has a massive fenced yard that their parents can just let them out to run around in the back. And we look for, middle to upper middle class where they have some discretionary income or discretionary spending power.
Yeah.
Well, and you've got the best
That's
of both worlds because you've got expensive project-based income in the boarding, and then you've got recurring revenue in the daycare. What's when you're thinking about structuring a doggy daycare? What's the model? Are you thinking daycare is more important than boarding, or is some mix of the two?
Yeah, usually the model depends on how urban or suburban or rural the facility is. So urban tends to skew much higher daycare. So call it 60 to 75% daycare revenue on an urban location, whereas something that's more suburban is generally 50-50. And then you see kind of a legacy kennel, which, I'm sure they're outside Dallas, 30 minutes outside the city. Big outdoor space, lots of kennels, they'll be like 75% boarding. And you also see boarding and daycare are the big revenue streams. And then you have grooming and training and then some retail. Grooming and training are a little more challenging because it's skilled labor, but you can see businesses that have really good grooming components that'll make up, 10 to 20% of revenue, and same with training.
Wow.
And
And
the
is the
project-based revenue is high quality because, for me, at least, I've got 2 dogs, and for a long time, I mean, we would go to Hawaii for 10 days and then come back, and the boarding would be almost as expensive as the,
Yeah.
Hyatt Regency in Maui, but we weren't willing to compromise because of, we've had a good experience, and obviously worrying about the safety and the security of your pet, similar to the child analysis, like you said. So it's a great
Yeah,
business.
the daycare for us is we run a membership model, which is pretty unique. So it's all of our daycare's monthly recurring
Guys,
revenue.
I have another box of pizza coming. I'm so sorry.
I was going to ask if you're more recurring versus reoccurring, even on a pay on demand system, I imagine it's pretty steady reoccurring revenue, but what
We're
drove,
recurring. So
right.
many
So that's why I was
daycares
going to
are,
ask what
yeah.
drove your calculus to recurring as opposed to kind of the pay on demand model.
We stumbled into it when we actually bought Paws and Rec. They were running a recurring revenue model, and
Okay.
this story's fun. I'll share the whole thing. But so the guy who started Paws and Rec was a husband and wife, and he was also a tech guy. And
Okay.
he had exited a software business, and him and his wife love dogs, and they kind of set this up on the side as kind of a side project. So he very much built it kind of like I would have, like a recurring
Sure.
revenue model, membership based, kind of add-on services, et cetera, great branding. And when we took it over, my partner was used to the standard daycare model, which is you buy packages, which is that reoccurring. You'll buy
By
10
days
days
at a time.
punch pass, you use them. And we decided, hey, let's try the recurring thing and see how it goes. And we kind of fell in love with both the revenue model, but also it allows us to much better predict capacity in our facilities. So we kind of have a better understanding of how many dogs per day are going to be there, because we know what our available pool of dogs is, how many days they're buying every month, and then we can staff better. So we ultimately have a better service for the customer. And then it allows us to just make it easier on the customer, where they don't have to think about what they're purchasing. They know how many days they get. So ultimately it's led a kind of better operational experience, better financial experience for us, and a better customer experience. So we've stayed with it. But kind of to close the loop on that story, the guy we bought the business from, he ended up selling it primarily because he knew it had legs and he wasn't going to continue growing it. And he was also working on a new tech startup that the venture capital firm I was working with ended up investing in his startup after we bought his business. So that was kind of a very cool, like, full circle experience with him.
Was that coincidence, or was there some facilitation of, like,
I reconnected him.
Yeah.
And then they ended up doing the deal. He knew of them already and had kind of talked to him, but I went back to them and was like, hey, listen, like, I really have enjoyed the process with the seller. He's been a great guy. I really think you guys should look at his business again. And they ended up investing in it.
Interesting. Before we pivot off from that, I'm curious, how much analytics you kind of put into what the financial return difference would be between your recurring model or flipping back to, like, the more traditional model, to the extent you're open to sharing. Do you find the use based on the recurring, like, it's more financially lucrative, or kind of where's that break even where, some people are using it a ton, where others use it 3 times a month, and so the margin's much higher? Did you guys do a lot?
Yeah, I think the pros and cons that we've kind of discovered just from a financial perspective is when you sell packages, you theoretically have no cap, right? So you can say,
Right.
I can sell packages to 3,000 people, and I can sell as many as I want every single day, and I'll just manage capacity based on they make reservations, they use them, etc. But when they buy them is very unpredictable. So you could sell a ton in June and then not sell any in July. So what we've decided to do is, we're gonna set this on a recurring basis, and we're gonna cap the available pool, because we know how many dogs that's gonna bring into the facility. So our facilities get to a point where, like, our monthly recurring revenue is capped on the daycare side because we can't fit any more members. Whereas if we were selling punch passes, we could keep selling, but it would result in a less optimal customer experience, because if that many people are buying punch passes, they're trying to use them, etc.
Could be a mess. Yeah, it could turn out to be a mess.
So you took the trade-off for the customer experience and the kind of steady revenue, so then I assume your focus pivots to your other revenue streams in order to increase.
For us, it was other revenue streams, and then it was additional facilities. That was kind of an aha for me in the business, is coming from software. It's like, if growth growth is usually your problem.
Yeah.
Capacity is not. You just fire up another server or hire another engineer, and you can usually manage that capacity, but you're trying to get growth. For us, it was like we had the growth and we didn't have the capacity. So we were
To
in
take
this
more, yeah.
position where we went and did more facilities because we felt like we had a lot more, we had more growth than we could cater to with our first location.
So
That's
Taylor,
great.
so tell us about the life cycle though, right? So you buy Paws and Rex in 2020, and then you made subsequent acquisitions and before exiting a few years later. Walk us through the entire journey from first acquisition to ultimate exit.
Yeah, so the first acquisition we did, really the idea was I was going to work on this part time. My partner was going to be the full time operator, and at the when we bought the business, it was kicking off like 120K in SCE, right? So it was enough to kind of pay us something between the two of us to work on it. And I stayed consulting for a venture firm for the first year, and he was kind of in there working the facility, figuring out how to re-optimize it. And so we had
Wow.
redone all the systems, all the marketing. He figured out, and we kind of knew this going in, that we could fit a lot more dogs into that facility than the prior owners had. So it just sort of blew out the expectations I think that we had for it very quickly. So we said, let's try to acquire another one. And we found another off-market deal that was probably like the best target we could have found for us ever at that stage. And one of our investors had taken his dog there for years and just called the guy up, and he was older, and said, "Hey, we bought this facility. We want to buy another one. Are you interested?" And similar story. I think we started talking to him in early August, and we closed on that place in early October. Probably a little bit more diligence than we did on the first one, but not much. It was a bigger deal, bigger facility, and had more upside. And at that point, I came on full time and said, "Hey, the venture firm was trying to get me on full time. This was taken off, and I sort of had this decision of like, hey, do I want to go into venture capital full time, or do I want to be a small business owner?" And I chose small business ownership. And yeah, so I came on full time and kind of built out a strategy of like, hey, how do we do more acquisitions? We also said, let's do a de novo so we can understand the comp against what these acquisitions look like from a financial standpoint. So we signed a lease for a de novo in early 22 that we started working on the build out of that, and then ran a pretty heavy search across Florida to try to do another acquisition. And we were unable to find another target until the summer of 23, where we closed on our third acquisition, which you guys helped us with. And at that point, we had started talking to Pet Resort Hospitality Group, which ultimately is our holding company, parent company that we've partnered with. And we just got the fourth one open, and we closed our transaction with Pet Resort Hospitality Group in October. So October's the month for us. We've done two acquisitions and an exit in October.
That's
Well,
fantastic.
it's easy to make sense of the life cycle here. We're talking October 2020 to October 2023 from inception, and I guess really you probably would back up to August when you had that first contact and started kind of negotiating the first deal as really being, I guess, the inception point, and maybe even before that, I don't know. But and then when did Pet Resort Hospitality Group make the first contact with you guys in 2023?
We met one of the co-founders of PRHG, Pet Resort Hospitality Group, in probably like 6 months after we started the business. And he was working
Wow.
for another large consolidator, and we knew them. They were kind of the biggest brand in the space. And we had just done our first deal, and he was at a trade show, and we walked right up to his booth and we said, "We just bought a doggy daycare and we're coming for you." And he thought that was great. And he stayed in touch, and he eventually left that group and started PRHG. And right after they started it, kind of in early 2023, he reached out and said, "Hey, we've started this new organization. We're interested in partnering with younger guys that want to keep growing, want to keep doing what they're doing." And we had kind of had 22 really was a year for us of searching, and we had really seen how limited we were with our ambition, our capital partners, just in terms of, hey, we can do a lot more than we're doing, but we need to buy facilities in Georgia and Miami and Jacksonville. And our existing investors were not keen on kind of that expansion yet until we had a little more consolidation in Tampa. So we were kind of getting to the point where like, hey, we need to either go raise outside capital or we need to partner with a private equity firm if we want to really capitalize, I think, on our talent and our capability. So we were open to it. We'd actually been chatting with another PE group when they PRHG contacted us. So we really kind of started the conversation with them kind of in February, March of 23, and then ultimately closed with them in October.
So Taylor, so just to summarize here, you started searching in August of 2020. You closed on your first acquisition in October of 2020. A few short months thereafter, you met a big private equity player in the space who ultimately became your acquirer. You acquired 3 shops in total, started 2 others de novo, and then you exited in October of 2023, a 3-year life cycle, give or take a few months, doing something pretty extraordinary, creating a lot of value and a lot of wealth for you guys. What do you attribute that to? Is this doable in any industry, or did you catch lightning in a bottle? What was the magic behind being able to do that?
Yeah, I wish I had a definitive answer because I would go do it again and,
Yeah.
sell the book on how to do it to anybody. But I think it was a lot of things. I don't think there's any one succinct answer. I think my partner and I are very well suited for one another. My partner's name is Mike. He's one of my favorite humans in the world. He's unbelievable with dogs and with the staff that we manage. So I think he was really well positioned to grow a fast growing dog daycare brand as an operator. And then I think my background in growing technology companies kind of brought the missing piece to him. So we just complemented each other very well. I can't imagine we couldn't have done what we did alone. I think
Can we pause for a second and drill a little deeper on what it's like to have
Kevin,
a business partner that you
please
enjoy?
continue,
with?
Taylor. Ignore Kevin, please.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So it's and I think we could spend a lot of time talking about partnership, but that's been probably the biggest factor.
Yeah.
But I think we caught an industry with a lot of tailwinds, right? Like all the COVID puppies, doggy daycare is growing. Eric, as you mentioned earlier, you're getting a lot of calls about dog daycare. So I think we caught the right industry at the right time that we were well positioned for. I think we were in the right market. I think Tampa's been growing. There's more and more attention coming to Tampa. So I think that helped, but it wasn't so saturated with dog daycares or buyers of dog daycare that we were competing that heavily. And I think we did a lot of stuff right. Like, I think, we paced it well. I think we were efficient with our capital. I think we built a good brand. I think that we just kind of checked a lot of the boxes that you hope to check as a searcher or an entrepreneur. We found a great partner that came at us at the right time.
So if you're keeping track at home, you said great partnership, great industry. So the industry happened to be very hot. You were efficient with capital. You built a good brand, and then you found the right ultimate exit partner at the right time.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that too. Like we weren't afraid to buy small. Like that wasn't a consideration for us. We weren't searching for a business to buy. Like we wanted to be in the dog daycare space. And the first one we bought was small. I mean, it was sub $1 million in revenue when we bought it. And we just rolled up our sleeves and we're like, how do we make this better? And then how do we keep doing that? So I think it was the added layer of this is we did a lot of work in the trenches to improve the businesses we were buying. So I think that value was not really us consolidating. It was like us using these acquisitions as a platform to really build a better business.
It's a story we hear from time to time. Guys like Mike Bakken at the Benchmark Group did something similar recently. He bought very small. His stories, been well told on other podcasts. We haven't had him on here, but local guy in town, and he bought a very small business the first time, and then ultimately acquired many. And he knew the business so well as a buyer that he would say, and hopefully someday he'll come on and tell his own story, but he'd walk into a potential target. He'd ask 3 questions. He'd be there for a half an hour, and he'd know how to fix the business, the value of it, and whether or not he wanted to buy it. Is that how you felt, Taylor, when you bought a small business? And obviously it was your partner who was in there day to day at first, but you guys bought small enough that you had to run it, meaning you had to get familiar with it. You had to learn the ins and outs. Did you feel like by the end of that 3-year life cycle that you knew the pet care, the pet hospitality business as well as anybody at that level?
Yeah, I mean, we're actively working to continue to do more acquisitions with PRHG, and I see a facility. I don't even need to go there. Like, send me a video. That's the first request we often have. Just send me a video walkthrough of your facility. Tell me the square footage, and I can tell you what we can do with that footprint. And then you look at what they do, and we figure out if we can buy it for a multiple that's fair and do better with it under our purview.
So, talk for a second before we continue through the exit story. Like, talk for a second about how you approach running, building out, kind of improving these businesses from a business cost standpoint. in an industry where there's so much kind of emotion and things tied to pets and stuff like that, and being a little inartful with my question, but where I'm headed is this feels like an industry where it would be easy to overspend on capex to build out really great features, hospitality features, and things like that to take care of pets to attract customers, but that ultimately cut into the bottom line. Vice versa, there would be easily things you could find to cut corners on to improve costs, but that would hurt your business because no one wants to drop their pet off to a square concrete box, right? How do you, how do you, am I overthinking that first of all?
No,
And
it's a great
secondly, if
question.
not, how do you think about that and kind of balancing the need for some real capex in developing these facilities while maintaining profitability and improving profitability?
Yeah, I think the biggest aha for me in the business, I had this sort of grand vision of creating like a cultish brand, right?
Mhm.
Where like a CrossFit style brand where people are obsessed with it, they make friends going to
Okay.
it. And I very quickly realized that while our customer is the human, we spend 5 minutes a day with them when they drop their dog off and pick them up. And we spend 8 hours a day with their dog who can't talk. So you have this kind of interesting juxtaposition of like the actual customer the paying customer spends 5 minutes in your lobby and then you spend 8 hours with what they're paying for, but there's not a lot of communication there. So what we really lead with, to answer your question more directly, is safety. So we look at if the facility is safe and we can provide a really high level of care, so the dog is going to have a great time and they're going to pull to come in the door when their parent gets out of the car. That's where we want to improve. So for example, when we bought our second location, they had outdoor space, outdoor play space, fencing, etc. And we looked at it and we're like, we need to sink a couple $100,000 into better turf and better fencing. And the parents are never going to see that, but the dogs are never going to get hurt if we do this. So
Yeah.
that's going to create more happy customers because they're not going to have injured dogs. The dogs are going to smell better. They're going to go home and so that's kind of what we lead with. But like they don't care what color the paint is in the back of the house. So we focus on making it clean, safe, efficient, and then we make the lobbies fun and pretty and nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it's such a trust business, right? And much like ours, Kevin. But when I got introduced to
Yeah.
search in around 2017, one of the first Sims I ever got was for a dog daycare in Kissimmee, Florida. I was in Dallas working at a big law firm, and look, I had this Sim sitting on my desk for a dog daycare in Kissimmee. But the problem that the daycare had was that they had had a dog die in the facility,
Mm.
in the boarding, and it was in the reviews. And so she was devastated by it, the seller, clearly. I mean, as anybody would be that has a heart, just stuff happens. And so she was trying to sell it, but she was having a difficult time selling it because the trust was gone with the
Yeah.
client base. So it's a it's a high risk business.
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest risk is that you have a dog die or you lose a dog. Because yeah, you can kill that trust factor in a community right away. And I think like another thing we've done well, that my background is kind of marketing communications. So we spend a ton of time really making sure that we're communicating well with our customers. We're being super transparent. And I've seen businesses where they have an accident, there's something horrible goes on with the dog, and they don't communicate well and they lose all trust and the business flounders. And I've seen other instances where something really tragic happens and they're super proactive about the way they communicate and they can survive that. But yeah, I mean it's a super high trust business, and the minute you break that trust, you have start to have problems.
So Taylor, so life cycle of the business. So you ultimately exit, you find the right partner. You said that was kind of the last ingredient in this kind of successful, maybe happy accident of a roll up here, and then you exit, find the right partner. It sounds like your experience was pretty easy because you just you got to know them early. They're the biggest buyers in the space. And they got to know you guys because they were probably irritated by you guys going, who are these dudes who are buying these daycares that that are in our way? But how would you, after having had that experience and you want to go do it again, how would you advise somebody who wants to find the right, exit partner to run a process like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like I don't use the word exit. Like we haven't exited the business. We're still proactively leading Paws and Rec.
Mhm.
We really partnered with a private equity firm, private equity backed group to continue growing the business. And that was really the motivator for us is And I think that's the important thing to really think through if you're talking about selling or partnering with a private equity group is what's your why for doing it, and does the private equity group and what they want align with what you want. And for us, when they approached us, they were like, "Hey, are you guys interested in working with us?" And we were like, "Well, we want to keep doing what we're doing. We just want to do it bigger and better with more support, more access to capital, and yeah, taking some chips off the table would be great as well." But our core motivator was really just more support to keep growing the business and be involved with kind of smarter, wiser people than just us. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're going into a potential kind of transaction on the sell side, it's really understanding like why are you doing this, and does the buyer kind of align with what you want.
Just curious, and part of this idea of partnering with a private equity fund and things like that, what did you do, or how did you navigate sort of that fear factor that I think a lot of people have, that, private equity's coming in, they're really coming in to screw me. They're going to stab me in the back and push me out as quickly as they can. They are going to try and screw me out of my earnout, all those things that I think people, rightly so, right? There's a huge element of trust factor going into a transaction like this. Like what was it that ultimately led you to be really comfortable with the group leading PHRG, that made you happy with the idea of like, yeah, this actually is a partnership? Because I love that that's the way you refer to it, right? This wasn't an exit. This was we partnered with them for our next phase of growth. And I like that mentality, but what helped you get there?
Yeah, I think the first thing is Trivest, who's the private equity firm, and PRHG is the platform. They they worked with us on the deal. Two of the one of the partners and a VP there flew out to meet us, and we took them to Sushi Ninja, which is a divey sushi restaurant where we
Love
do
it.
all our important dinners.
I love that. I love
And
that you got a little
yeah,
spot. That's cool.
oh yeah, yeah. And they sat down with us and really wanted to get to know us, and they came up from Miami. And I mean, these guys manage a $600 million fund, and we're this small business in Tampa, and they came up to show face and spent a lot of time with us and wanted to understand our motivation, and we got to kind of know them as humans. And they send a LOI. Sort of on the first page of the LOI, they make a couple things really clear. They're like, we've been doing this for 40 years and we don't retrade, and we have a history of working with founder-led businesses to help them grow. And that sounds great, but I diligenced the heck out of them as a firm, and I talked to a bunch of their other founders. I talked to some of their advisory board members, and then I did that with the guys at PRHG as well, and just kind of consistently heard that, hey, if they're going to partner with the PE group, like, these are the best guys to do it with. They're going to be true to their word. So there was
Yeah.
no part of me that felt like they were trying to like bamboozle us. You're kind of, there's friction when you go through the deal process for sure, but they handled that friction really well, and they kind of understood what we wanted. They also understood sort of some of our immaturities, right? Like we've
Yeah.
never done this before, and I think they handled that with a lot of grace, and that I think continued to build a lot of goodwill up with us, and we spent more time with them throughout the transaction to just understand, like, do we have the same values? Do we want the same things? And it ultimately came down, like, we're negotiating the few final points of the deal, Eric, and you were a part of this, where they were like, guys, listen, like, if we fire you after the deal, like, we have to go to Florida and manage doggy daycares. Like, that's not what we do. We're finance guys.
Yeah.
Like, it's there's an element of trust here that you're just going to have to get behind. But yeah, the whole thing, I think, from start to finish was about building that level of trust that has subsequently kind of carried forward, and now we're kind of enacting in real time.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, it's probably
interesting.
they're investing in you guys, not in necessarily the businesses, because to my point earlier, they're probably going, these guys are a little bit of an irritation. They're buying these businesses that we want. Let's just get them on board.
Yeah, I think their whole thesis, like a lot of the other consolidators in the pet resort space, have gone at this of like, hey, let's buy a business and then we'll run it. We'll get rid of the owner. They'll retire, whatever. And our thesis with PRHG is like, we want partners, and we were one of the first, and we want to kind of help them grow their brands in local markets, and let's create a great community of owner operators that are continuing to run their businesses, want to grow, are hungry, and we can provide private equity level support to that growth. And that got us really excited, just because we kept saying, like, hey, if we exit the business, like, what else are we going to do? And we want to keep doing this, but we just want to do it in a bigger way with other smart experienced people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to say, I think it's like an underrated, a lot of people will look into the portfolio, they'll look into the actual fund managers that are running the PE fund, et cetera, but they don't necessarily go back to like other portcos, even outside of the platform. And I remember I wrote a post months ago. I don't know if you follow much in way of the cannabis industry, but very famously, there's a massively successful company, Dutchy, where the investors basically kicked out the founders like overnight. It was kind of a big scandal or whatever. Well, I know the space pretty well. And I just wrote this post of like, you got to know who you're getting into bed with and look at their track record, because they'll usually leave their cards on the table. And if you go back through, even unrelated to cannabis and things like that, you would see that some of the people on the board and on the cap table and stuff like that have a history of having done exactly this thing with previous businesses. And, to the extent you can get access to that information, I think it's such an underrated way to build that trust and rapport, is to go back through, look at that history and track record. And then you compound that with like the things you're saying of, when that you've got a blinder, there's some information asymmetry, and they're not just like massively taking advantage, but they're trying to, walk through those issues with you. It just builds so much trust. I think it's a underrated kind of option when you're evaluating a potential partner like that. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I spoke to one of the other portfolio CEOs from Trivest, and he told the exact story I wanted to hear with no prompting, where it was like, I got into the business we're in because I want to build a great business. It's great to our customers, that really elevates our employees. And, we had been doing that. And like, I've just been able to 10X it with their help. And it was like, that's what I want to do. And this is a business that's done that with a bunch of other businesses. Like, why wouldn't I partner with them? Because I think you go through like the transition process of being kind of a independent CEO to working with a private equity firm of like, you're giving up control to some extent, maybe to all extents. And what are you kind of getting for that? And for me, it was a real like ego killer of a process of like, I don't need to do this by myself. Like I'm probably not, the next Steve Jobs of doggy daycare, and like, that's okay. But what I ultimately want is to build a great company, and I want to do that with other guys that want to build a similar company that share my values. And I think we found that in our partner. And I think if you can sort of get over your need to be the guy, you might be able to build a bigger business.
I have this conversation with Kevin every day. I'm like, you got to set your ego aside, Kev.
That's right. Get out of my way.
Get out of the way. I'm kidding. Kevin's the one with the ego problem here, for the record.
I figured.
Naturally.
Yeah. It's interesting though, Taylor. You're a little bit of a, you're not the typical seller cast type, right? And you didn't sell, you kind of partnered, right? But it is interesting. You have sat in that seat that most sellers sit in, and kind of psychologically been there in terms of being approached by potential partners and running that analysis of who are they, what do they want from me, and do I want to take that path, or do I want to continue down the path that I'm on? I think it's a really important thing for buyers to try to understand the psychology, because sellers of all people, I'm a little skeptical when Kevin talked about, they're going to look at the track record and blah, blah, blah. I think people are oftentimes able to look at track records and tell themselves whatever story they want to tell themselves.
True.
When there's dollar signs attached to it, and say, I know they did all this stuff, but I'm different.
Yeah, I'm different. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think that's the case with sellers. I think sellers are people, even the 60, 70-year-old sellers that most people are buying from, that are saying, if you indicate any red flags to me, I'll just keep making money. I'll just keep working. I'll just keep right on the path that I'm on. And I don't need to sell to you. I don't need to sell this business at all. In fact, it's going great. That's why you want to buy it. And so talk about the psychology of being on that side of the table. And, if you're now as a buyer, you go to approach somebody, you've done it yourself multiple times. How do you think about presenting yourself as a buyer or a partner?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and it's funny having tried to understand the psychology as a buyer, and then sort of sat on the other side as a seller. There's some scenarios where you're just not going to win, right? Like, you're not going to find the person at the right time, and I think ultimately acquisition is a long game, and advisors told us that early on. They were like, plant a bunch of seeds and you'll be shocked how many people call you a year from now because circumstances have changed. So we've seen that for ourselves now. Like we had a woman call us last week who we called a year and a half ago, and she has a family life event and she wants to sell her business now. So I think understanding that, like, you got to sort of find the right person at the right time, and then you may not be the right person for them, right? And that doesn't make you a bad person. Like, you just, it's understanding sort of what are their priorities, can you meet those priorities, and if so, sort of how do you build the trust around that as you move forward. Like for us, if PRHD would have come in and been like, listen, we have a playbook, this is what we're going to do with your business, we would have been uninterested. The conversation wouldn't have gone very far. It was like they wanted to partner with young founders that wanted to keep growing their businesses and their brands. Now we'll partner with businesses that want to retire. Like if you have a big pet resort and you're 70 years old and you want to retire, like we can make that work with PRHD as well. So we're sort of willing to work with both of those. And yeah, I think it's just understanding, like, can you accommodate what the seller actually wants as a buyer?
So Taylor, one of the themes throughout this conversation has been the importance of a good partner. You've mentioned yours many times. I'm a huge believer. I don't tell them this, but I think I have great partners. And I think one of the happy accidents in our partnership was we all happened to be very different, but very complementary people. We did and I always forget the name of it. Finish that sentence, Kevin.
Index.
We did a culture index when we first started, which is amazing, by the way. I shouldn't forget the name because it's really terrific. I think everybody should do a culture index. And by the end of it, we were all like, wow, like I need a cigarette. You just told me everything about me. And then looking at the personality types, very complementary, and it's worked out extremely well, I think, thus far, at least for us. Tell us about your partnership. Did you know that you and Mike would be complementary going into it? And how did things kind of play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike and I are really lucky where, we were roommates for, I think, 2 years before we even thought about buying a business. So we had this, living arrangement where we spent a ton of time together. We sort of understood that, and he was probably the best roommate I ever had. And I think I was hopefully the best roommate he ever had. We just got along really, really well. And we got sober together. So we sort of had this shared value system around how we approached life that we learned in recovery that we really have tried to apply to our business, where, we believe people can change. We believe in trying to kind of work and live with the degree of integrity and doing what we say we're going to do, and being honest and overly communicative. So we had sort of this foundational kind of friendship relationship. And then we had these very complementary skill sets with him as the operator and me as kind of the business person. And, we very quickly fell into, like, he knows what he knows how to do. I know what I know how to do. And when we have questions, we'll kind of meet in the middle, but we don't micromanage each other at all. We really let each other kind of manage the separate sides of the business. And, we often say, if it happens inside the facility, it's on Mike. If it happens outside the facility, it's on me. Yeah. And, that trust kind of grew and grew, I think, over the years of us working together, and to the point where, like, we'll often run into an issue that we run by the other person, and we're really just looking for consent rather than like an actual dialogue, because we're so on that same page. But for me, like, I couldn't have done this without him. Like, I wasn't going to manage a dog daycare day to day. I think he could have probably done one or two facilities without me, but I think the way that we pushed our growth was really kind of with my experience. So we were able to do something really unique because of each other. So I look at a lot of these solo searchers that, are either business people or maybe they're operators. And I just can't imagine running a business as a solo founder. I think there's so much emotional weight and stress to being an entrepreneur. To just have somebody, like, in the trenches with you that's equally vested is so important. And two, there's just a lot to do. So having somebody else that's, like, equally on the hook to help you do it is awesome.
100%. Yeah, I think in our business, and Kevin, tell me if you see it differently, but, like, there'll be days where, one of us is down and other people are up, and then vice versa. And it's nice because entrepreneurship it's life on hard mode. And so having people to kind of offset a little bit of the workload, but partnerships can go badly also. Looking at it in hindsight, if you were to tell a searcher you should do a partnered search, how would you advise them to find the right partner?
I think you just got to spend a lot of time with people, right? I think it's really hard to know who people are just when you're having kind of business calls and conversations. Mike and I were roommates, so it was like we saw each other in our underwear and, before bed and in the morning waking up, and it's like that degree of intimacy, right?
That's going to be the little clip at the beginning of the show, just to get people to Maybe
That's
I'm
our
gonna
promo clip
hang
for
on till
this
minute
episode.
58 because I want to hear about this underwear thing.
But no, I think sort of building that degree of trust takes time, and it's
Mhm.
hard to force. It was, I've had a lot of instances where I didn't partner with someone, and my first few interactions with them were like, this person's great. They would be awesome to partner with. I'd love to work with them. And then sort of the more you work together and the more you interact, the more kind of you recognize maybe that personalities are conflicting or your values are different. So I think it's like approach partnership slowly and diligently and before you just kind of jump into it, because it takes a while to really know who somebody is.
Well, I'd be curious your thoughts on that too, Eric, because like we had a long-standing relationship, not nearly as close as Taylor and his
I've
roommate,
never
but
seen you in your underwear, for the
that's
record.
true story.
Yet, Kevin.
Yet.
Yeah, next
SM
summer.
Bash coming up.
That's
Slumber
right.
party, boys.
That's it. Let's go.
But the flip side of that, like, I kind of laugh haphazardly in retrospect of like, we launched this firm never having met Sam in person, right? So we kind of had both sides in kind of our original founding partnership with the three of us, where you and I have known each other for 7 years at that point or whatever. We literally met Sam on Twitter, and over some conversations brought that evolved from how can we have a referral relationship to we should partner this guy. So I'm curious, putting the shoe on your foot, how you would answer.
Well, there's lots of ways to know who somebody is. And Sam, to talk about Sam Rosati for a second, Taylor, somebody you know extremely well. He's a fantastic
human.
person. His reputation precedes himself. He's a consummate team player. We saw that in kind of the building phase of this. He's got high integrity. He's just a good person. And I think there's nobody, maybe he talked to his brother, I guess, that would say otherwise. And at least, and candidly, I've never run a background check on Sam. I've never gone out there and asked people about Sam, and so maybe it was intuition. I don't know, but I would certainly advise somebody, because if a partnership goes badly, you've got, from a legal perspective, having been a legal counselor, we've seen many partnerships go badly, even of people that knew each other very well. And even all the diligence in the world, having been roommates, see each other in your underpants, whatever, there still can be circumstances that come up. Business doesn't perform well. You see a different side of a person that maybe they've never even seen of themselves. And so there's got to be mechanisms to get out also, right? And so having high quality agreements, having conversations with, the ability to expel a partner, Kevin, wink, wink, hearkening back to, we're not expelling anybody for the record, but we just went through our partnership agreement, and, there are some provisions to expel people, and if you need to do that, you want to be able to have a mechanism, because if not, your whole life will be held hostage by a bad partnership. Your whole life. It's the way you make money.
I think we had these conversations right in the beginning, and I think that just makes the partnership stronger. It's like a prenup for marriage. It's like, some people think a prenup is a horrible thing, and some people think it's super romantic. And for us, it was like, let's talk through the worst case scenarios and understand like how we would approach that now when everything's kumbaya, and agree to that. And I think that process can really kind of strengthen the partnership, but also put you in a position to where, if something does happen, there are mechanisms to unwind it.
I think it takes the pressure off. If you've got a means to end a relationship in a constructive and productive and predictable way, I think any business or personal breakup, the biggest stressor is the uncertainty, right? And the negotiation and the adversarial nature of it. And you take a lot of that out of the equation because the big decisions have already been made up front. That's a good thing. So I would say pick somebody that you've diligenced, that has a reputation, that you've got a track record with, and then make sure you've got the end in mind, because there will be an end at some point.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd throw in there is like understanding and kind of consistently checking in on like making sure you want the same things for the business. So that was a big process for us, where it's like, hey, we started out, it's like, let's do one, let's see how it goes. Okay, we did one, let's do another one, let's see how it goes. Okay, we did two, like, do we want to go real hard at this for 5 years? Yeah, let's do that. Do we want to partner with these PE guys and go real hard at this with them for 5 years? Maybe. Yeah, hell yeah, let's do that. So it's this constant kind of like rechecking, where at any point one of us could have been like, you know what, dude, like, I don't want to work that hard. Like, we have a good business. We can just cash flow this thing. Let's relax. And the other could have been sort of like, let's go, 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 go. But we were kind of constantly evolving that together. And I think that's allowed us to kind of get to where we are together rather than, going our separate ways because we wanted different things.
I think alignment of vision is really important. Alignment of motivation is really important as well, or knowing what's driving the person. One of the first questions I asked you, Kevin, if you recall, is like, what are we doing? Like, why, what do you want to do? And like one of the first things he brought up, like in the first breath, was like, I got a kid that's about to go to college. I got, all this stuff. It was like family, right? And so I was sitting there going, okay, here's a person that I'm going to partner with that 2 or 3 years in isn't going to go, okay, I'm good with mediocre. I'm good with just, whatever, fly by night, or where we're failing and it's okay because I don't care because I've got, low overhead. It doesn't matter. And, sorry about your life, Eric. Or I just give up. So making sure that they've got the same ethos from a motivation perspective. And Kevin, there's been highs and lows in our business. And I don't think there's been a single time where I've ever gone to you and been like, hey, you need to do blah, 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 because I know that just as well as I do that we have to succeed. And so there's nothing I need to say. And that's the healthy relationship you want to have.
That's a solid partnership, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Taylor, let's wrap up here, from one partnership to another, having moved with PHRG now. So what's next? Anything else? I know you're still kind of full-time with Paws and Rec for the foreseeable future, but anything else you're working on that you want to chat about or plug as we wrap up this episode?
No, I mean, it's kind of full steam ahead with Paws and Rec and PRHG. We're really actively kind of helping them build out the platform, and they're helping us figure out how we keep growing the brand here in Florida. And we're super excited about that. That's going to be the primary focus for the next couple of years. But I'm also really excited about search and ETA, and I got a few things percolating over there, and I'm starting to look at investing in some search deals. So definitely want to kind of stay really involved in the search community. I've fallen in love with kind of entrepreneurship through acquisition. I spend a lot of time trying to build stuff from 0 to 1, and I love the opportunity in SMB right now. And I love what you guys are doing. And, kudos to you guys too. I think our experience working with SMB law was really fantastic. And I think you guys are an awesome service provider for the community. And, I hope to be more involved in that community in a bigger way, kind of moving forward as Paws and Rec evolves too.
Yeah. Love that. And if you're ever looking to invest in a startup law firm, just, asking for a friend. Well, I'm kidding.
Send me the SIM.
It's going to be a picture of these boxes of pizza I'm about to open.
Yeah.
Here, so.
As long as it's not Domino's. The minute I see Domino's, I'm out.
John of Bleecker Street. That's one of the best, right? I mean,
sounds fancy. I don't know if I know it, but
wonderful.
It sounds good.
Isn't that, Kevin? That's where the event was a few months ago, right?
Correct.
Yeah, we had an event there. I threw an event that I didn't attend, John of Bleecker Street. So full circle.
Yeah, Eric
Love
had
that.
some travel snafu and didn't make it. We were in town, supposed to be in town for 24 hours and put together a pretty well attended, like I think at the height of it, 40 people or something.
Nice.
We just kind of took over their outside patio.
40 whole people. Look at us.
The manager came out at some point and was like, "Who's in charge here?" He pulls me aside. He's like, "So what should we be expecting? Do you have more people coming?"
You're like, we got like somewhere in the neighborhood of 30, maybe 40 people coming here. We know how to draw
Twitter,
a little
maybe.
bit of a crowd.
We need
Step
some
aside,
pies.
Taylor Swift. We are the pizza guys.
Well, Taylor, thanks for joining us. Fantastic to chat with you. Really love the story and look forward to collaborating on more in the ETA space in the future. That's great.
Likewise. Thank you guys for having me, and thanks for all the help on our deals we've done together.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mundane Millionaires. If you enjoyed what you heard in this episode, make sure to follow Mundane Millionaires wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.